Thanks very much for the opportunity to present here. QX, you may recall when I joined last year, I've pushed this towards battery minerals. And so now it's a multi-commodity project developer with a focus on hard rock lithium, nickel through a separate company in Europe, and copper moly with gold in Queensland. And our approach is to accelerate the development of these projects by engaging end users. And although that's not particularly newsworthy, it's very important when we're in these times with the confidence that these projects are going to get developed. So sometimes this doesn't come out as news, but we'll continue. Next slide, please. Now, I will be making forward-looking comments, so please keep that in mind. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, our focus with lithium is hard rock in the Pilbara. Now, the reason for being in the Pilbara is it's a prime location. There's two large projects there at the moment, and there's every chance that between ourselves and others, we'll be finding another 3 to 5 projects over the next couple of years. And the advantage of the Pilbara, old rocks, they tend to produce large projects. But the new projects that will be coming forward will perhaps be a little more subtle, and that's what we've been spending time on. Separately, nickel. Why have we been looking at nickel? It's not directly in QX. It's in a related company called Bayrock. And the reason for doing that is nickel continues to be a battery mineral, which is a key focus across the sector. And so we looked at the right sort of jurisdiction where there's interest. And that's one of the reasons why we're supporting a company in Sweden. It's inside the EU. That's a key part of the new EU Critical Raw Materials Act. And that was put in essentially to be competition with the US. So it's a great location to have a suite of properties. Then last of all, with moly, copper and gold, we've got an advanced moly project. We'll probably be making some news about advancing that quite soon. There are similar targets quite nearby with copper and with gold values. And so in the next couple of months, there'll be quite a bit more news about it. I had hoped to have more to say in this month, but there have been some frustrating delays here and there, which your other presenters have commented, and I'm sure a number of the companies that you've followed in the past have had these sorts of things over the last few months, and we're working about ways to unblock that. The next slide, please. No, I'm going to move on to the next slide, please. Sorry. So first of all, with lithium hard rock, the great part about the Pilbara is it's a proven lithium province, but moreover, there's the opportunity for rapid development. In our assessment, in looking at jurisdictions to consider hard rock lithium development potential, WA actually stands out that you can have a discovery and move to production in 3 years. And there's pretty much very few other places. I guess next could be some provinces in Canada, but it is quite rare, and the market needs as much production as possible. Despite the fact that you've seen some softness in lithium pricing, don't get distracted by that. There is huge pent-up demand, and they're looking for key projects. We've got 4 different leases or lease areas, and we're progressively moving through each one. Next slide, please. Our start was on the Turner River, and that's because we had high grades outcropping at surface between 1% and 4%. But there have been a number of companies that have had some high grades at surface, and it's been tricky to follow up underneath. We initiated a drill program in December last year, and again in February, March this year. We're waiting for all of those assays to come in so that we can say something definitive about the next steps here. But it's certainly been exciting and certainly the right area. Next slide, please. We entered into a framework agreement with Bayrock. They have 390 square kilometers of leases in Sweden. Sweden is a tier 1 mining jurisdiction. They've been actively supporting mining, particularly in the north there, for over 100 years. The flagship Langer is an old mining lease, so it's certainly well positioned to expand and develop. And there are projects nearby, including Vostok, which could easily add tons. It's the right sort of location. When we signed up to this, the EU hadn't come up with a competing act to the US Inflation Reduction Act, which supports battery minerals. That's now occurred. And there are end users who are actively looking for these sorts of assets. Next slide, please. I can confirm that based on some of the conversations I've had with end users on lithium, on nickel, there continues to be a lot of interest despite some softness short-term in pricing. Sweden is not just a good mining jurisdiction, particularly in the north, but it's also very well positioned from an infrastructure. It has quite low power costs, not as low as Quebec in Canada, but certainly a lot lower than Western Australia. And it also has smelters and refiners in Scandinavia. So you can actually have the whole value chain pretty much bottled up right within the EU. And that's the sort of thing that end users are looking for. The flagship here, Langer, has had some great intercepts, such as 10 meters at 2% nickel, 0.7% copper. Next slide, please. And you'll see this in cross-section. It's a dipping deposit. These are the sorts of things that you would have seen in the Kambalda area in Western Australia. And you've got to follow them up. You've got to look for downhole indicators. And nearby at Vostok, this is relatively nearby, some cracking grades quite close to surface within 30 meters. So the aim here is to do some drilling in Bayrock. QX is supporting them, and then at some stage that will move into a separate, entirely separate vehicle. Next slide, please. QX has had a gold portfolio for some time. The projects in central Queensland have got some outstanding numbers, trenches that have had 7 meters at 7 grams. But for anybody who's been on the East Coast, it just keeps raining and raining and raining. We've now had 3 months or 2.5 months in central Queensland without rain. So we're hoping that we can finally get on to this area. We'd hoped to do that last year, and then it started raining again. And so you could expect some news fairly soon. We're aiming to move that forward. Then separately with the Anthony Moly deposit, this is quite a significant deposit. It's moly only, even though there's a gold project nearby. And there's a very similar lookalike geophysical target along strike called Creek, and we aim to release a little bit more information on these. Next slide, please. So over the coming months, you're going to see drill results. You're going to see what we're doing in Queensland and a little more from Bayrock. And what we don't see in the news is the discussions we've had with end users. Because of my past work in this space now for over 8 years, that continues to be looked upon favorably. So when we get to the right time, we'll have more to say about that as well. Next slide, please. Company is reasonably well financed, 2.6 million cash. That 0.3 million in liquid assets should actually be about 1 million in additional assets as part of our release today. So if we move on to our next slide, everybody's had some issues around share price, but it's picking up a little. A solid board, different skills. It's what you want to see on a board. And last slide, please. And so just on the last slide. And so if you want to make contact, please email me. I haven't had the best health this calendar year. I would apologize to you if you've tried to contact me and that hasn't happened. But we aim to push out more news. The market has been a little bit quiet anyway, but watch this space over the coming months. There's going to be quite a bit coming out now. Back to you, Tim.
Thank you, Steve. Apologies, we just had to kill that camera for a little bit. Quick question, you're kind of spoiled for choice here in a certain regard. Is there any opportunity to spin off some of these assets?
One of the reasons that I joined QX was the assets it had, the solid board, and also the fact that they're not wedded to a single asset where you must develop this and pour all your money into it. They've got a history of developing assets and spinning them off either in separate vehicles or as trade sales. And so that is very much the approach here. I have wanted to keep a strong focus on battery minerals. And the reason for hard rock lithium is that's what the market wants right now. We continue to look at other lithium assets. The nickel is already in a separate vehicle with Bayrock. And as we develop some of these copper moly assets, that could easily be something separate as well. What I have to say is that the company has a history of being focused on shareholder value accretion. And although they're trite words from a CEO, that's actually what this company's done in the past, and what I've done in the past and will continue to do here in the future. So first cab off the rank is lithium. You'll see more on the nickel, but that's always something we're looking at, how best to move these along, because where we can add value is on the exploration development. You've heard some other commentators talk about that, but furthermore, bringing in those end users, and whether that's through a joint venture, a sale, together with somebody larger, that's how you create real value and actually get these things going, because we still have an opportunity this decade to deliver battery minerals and rare earths into this expanding market. And by that time, then the market will be dominated again by larger players.
And of course, Steve, your history and experiences in lithium, is that prompted some offtake discussions, or is that attracting attention given your background and experience?
I've had a number of conversations in different jurisdictions, and we continue to do that. My comments, more than offtake discussions, because these aren't sufficiently advanced yet to hold those. They've been more around strategic partnerships. My essential thesis to end users, be they car makers, battery makers, cathode makers, has been that once a project gets to a resource or a feasibility study, normally that product is going to be pre-sold, or at least half of it or the lion's share of it, because there just aren't enough projects around. So I've been saying, get involved in these projects a little earlier, so that when we actually come up with a resource, you're already positioned there to work with us. So that's been my approach, and I have to say I've been flattered by the positive response. So
they could potentially become funding partners?
Yeah, the short answer to that is yes. I can't really go into the nuts and bolts, but naturally that's a logical way. That I tend to think of it more like this. We're trying to concertina the timeline to development. So if you get the end users involved earlier, that's a better thing for them. It's a better thing for the company and the shareholders. And naturally, that would normally come with additional funding.
Makes perfect sense. Now, Cash, you're reasonably well funded, but you've got a number of projects on the go. How are you allocating those funds?
So we've put up nearly 600,000 Aussie towards Bayrock, but fairly soon there will be a rights issue. We've indicated to the market that's going to occur. That should be fairly soon. So some of that funding will actually come back to the company, together with some equity in the company itself. So that's one way where money that comes back. And then as we move into later in the year, probably some of these discussions that I've been having will actually convert into funding. We do have a shareholder at the moment who is very well positioned in the supply chain, and we've been looking at others in different commodities to bolster that going forward.
Thanks, Steve. That's all we have time for. I hope you have a nice weekend. I hope you're feeling better. Thanks for your time.
Cheers for now. Bye.